Now to Kenya's Turkana County, which has been in the world headlines of late of archaeological finding that reveals evidence of a massacre of human relatives up to 10,000 years ago. KTN's Joanne Letting traced a group of researchers following up on these finds and at Nataruk, Turkana West, and here's that story from her.
Warfare or intergroup conflict is today associated with one group of people wanting the territory or resources or power held by another. Prehistoric hunter-gatherer societies were not active and therefore did not own land or have significant possessions. Many scholars have argued that warfare only emerged after active farming. However, the findings at Nataruk show that intergroup conflict has a much longer history.
A lot of the understanding of conflict has based around ideas that one needs to own land or things or power to be susceptible of being attacked. It was thought that people who lived lives that were not settled, were partly nomadic or largely or partly nomadic, we don't know the extent, and who didn't have a strict ownership of things. People thought that they didn't have warfare, that they didn't have conflict, because there was nothing to steal. So in Nataruk, we see that that is not true, that there was conflict in their lives as well.
So what could have led to the attack?
We tend to assume that what is worth stealing is the things that we appreciate. And I think that for hunter-gatherers, they obviously had things that were sufficiently valuable that somebody else wanted them. So I think that we have to change our views and step back and think from somebody else's perspective what is worth fighting for. And we shouldn't forget that, again, this time, Lake Turkana was so rich, and probably the populations were quite large. So there was probably pressure about the amount of food and the places where you could go hunting and so on. And that was sufficient for conflict.
Of the 27 individuals discovered, 21 were adults, 8 males, 8 females, 5 unknown, and partial remains of 6 children. The first skull to be excavated is said to be 99% complete.
The first skeleton that we excavated at Nataruk was actually already diagnostic of what had happened at the site. So remember that I said that I noticed a piece of a skull of bone that was still buried. And what I saw on the ground, just coming out of the ground, was the back of somebody's head. And that head was this one. And all that showed outside the ground was this part. So we excavated this skeleton, and indeed it turned out to be a man, again lying prone, face down into the lagoon sediment. And when we cleared it and took it out, we could see that actually it had extraordinary injuries in the head. So this man was hit on the front of the head, as you can see, and this injury actually squashed the skull and tilted it outwards. But then it was also hit on the side of the head, and this hit crushed the face, pushed it sideways, and eventually also broke his neck.
The remains of a 6 to 9 month old fetus were also recovered from within the abdominal cavity of one of the women.
One of the most poignant is the skeleton of a young woman. And we found her, she was sitting, not lying, and her hands were crossing between the legs and over the feet that were also crossed. So she was in a crouch position with the head tilted backwards. And when we finished the excavations, and we found little fragments of bone, and then received all the bone that came from around her body. So what came from inside her belly, her abdomen, in there were the little bones of a baby.
Bones of wild animals and fishes were also discovered at the site.
So 10,000 years ago, this part of Africa was actually very wet. And Lake Turkana was much, much larger than it is now. So on the shores of that lake, we have found the remains of all types of East African animals. So we have found elephant and hippos and giraffe and buffaloes and rhinos and primates and lions and hyenas and crocodiles and all the others. So it was an extremely rich place.
The site was first discovered in 2012 by Pedro Ebea, a Turkana fossil hunter working with the In Africa project. Following careful excavations, the researchers used radiocarbon and other dating techniques on the skeletons, as well as on samples of shell and sediment surrounding the remains to place Nataruk in time. For KTN News in Nataruk, Turkana County, I am Joanne Letting.